All right, folks, welcome to another episode, this time with Daniel Castro, Vice President at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. It's one of the most prestigious, nonpartisan, technology-focused think tanks. Like I've come across their work for years now. Their founding story and their founders, like, really respected across the industry. And ultimately, it is a especially big pleasure to have Daniel on, who is an expert in technology policy with focuses on AI, data-driven innovation, privacy, security, accessibility, like all things that myself and I know a lot of our listeners care about. And just to prove that Daniel's a big deal, he, in previous roles prior to joining ITIF, was an IT analyst for the Government Accountability Office. And then here's one that I'm definitely gonna ask about because I was kind of geeking out. He was a 2015 appointee to the U.S. Data Advisory Council, appointed by then Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker, who some of us remember that name. A lot of us remember J.B. Pritzker, her younger brother, and maybe the Pritzker dynasty. If you've read about being one of the top 10 richest families in the U.S., there's a lot of cool stories behind them. And then as well, another claim to fame that I spotted when I was reading up on him was that he was named top 25 under 40 in government and tech. So, Daniel, huge welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on. I like to start with this first question, which is, now that folks kind of know your resume, maybe take us behind the scenes. What drives a lot of those passions today?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. I got interested in tech policy because I was fundamentally a nerd at heart. I was a techie. I did computer science for my undergrad as kind of my extra major. When I was at Georgetown, my real major was foreign service, but I wanted to kind of blend these two areas. And, after I did a master's at Carnegie Mellon, focusing on information security. But I was really interested in some of the big tech questions that were being wrestled with in Congress at the time. And one of the big ones at the time was around voting and how, after the 2000 elections, are we going to update the election systems, the voting systems that we use? And a lot of people were saying, we have to go back to paper. And to me, that was nuts for a few reasons. One of them being that if you followed any of the innovations that were happening around cryptography at the time, you would know that there were some really big innovations going on at the time. One of them being homomorphic encryption, which was the idea that you could encrypt things, and then once these, the information is encrypted, you could perform operations on them while the data is still encrypted. So what that means in terms of elections is that you could actually vote, have your vote be encrypted, so nobody could see what it is, but you could add up all the ballots and get totals, and you could actually validate those totals without having to reveal how anyone voted. So instead of having this idea that we go to the polls and we just, fill out a form or, hit your buttons on your voting system and just kind of hope and pray that the election goes right, you could actually go home, download all the encrypted ballots, and anyone in the world could verify that, yes, your ballot was counted as cast, that it wasn't manipulated, that you could verify that all the election totals were correct, and that, this is something that people could learn how to do in their civics classes. You can have this blend of civics and computer science. And to me, that was this really powerful idea, but we were having this bill that was moving through Congress that would say, we're going to outlaw that. We're going to say that you have to do only paper ballots that you fill out with a pencil. And to me, that was nuts. And so I basically came to this position saying, I want, more people who think about tech, care about tech, to be involved in helping draft and think about the laws and regulations that affect the nation. Because I think if you know more about it, you're going to make better decisions. And that's really been the motivating force of what I've tried to do at ITIF.
What a prescient starting place for, I've read about, and I remember as a kid, 2000 presidential election came down to what, like a couple thousand votes in Florida, right? And the whole saga of the recount, like I've read all of that now numerous times. And I never would have thought that folks would say, oh, the solution's paper. And yet here we are in 2024, and it's amazing how many conversations I listen to where folks are debating the merits of our electoral process and the validity of it. So I'm like, not much has changed since 2000 when you started.
And some people still want to go back to paper, and it's insane that, we actually, it's funny enough, when I first researched that, I went back historically, and one of the big innovations, like now 80 years ago, were physical voting systems. So not
Yeah, totally.
computer-based, but, you had in Pennsylvania, these little machines, you go and you actually crank them and they'd be little rotators and dials. And that was actually one of the first ways they got rid of so much of the ballot box stuffing that would always happen in the
Totally.
past. Because once crank those things, they would be locked in and you couldn't go in and add to that tally.
That's cool.
And so there were always these really interesting innovations. And this idea that we're going to just go back to stuffing the ballot box, to me, it was just nuts. It was like, okay, yes, there are problems. There are always problems, new problems that come up and new problems to solve. But saying let's take digital technologies completely out of the picture, take it off the table as an option, those are things I think are a real serious issue.
Yeah, of course. Next one. This is honestly me just fanboying. What was it like getting appointed by Penny Pritzker in 2015? Like, just take me behind the scenes. I really am. Instead of fanning out on like the next movie, I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool, Daniel. Take me behind the scenes.
Well, that was really exciting opportunity. So, I mean, she came in and she was Secretary Pritzker,
Oh yeah,
just a tremendous force
correct.
throughout, the entire Commerce Department. Really forward leaning on so many issues. But one of the ones that I was excited about was data. I mean, she just came in and said, data is important. Now, of course, if you know anything about the federal government here, Commerce Department is in charge of most of the statistical agencies across the federal government. So biggest one being Census Bureau, right? So all the big data, but all the economic data that's being collected, they all report up to Secretary for Commerce. And so she obviously cared about data from that sense, but she also cared about data in the sense that she was hearing about big data and data analytics. And she said, I'm the Secretary of Commerce. I need to understand this really well. And so she brought together people from academia, from industry, lots of really interesting folks, lots of people who were, kind of at the front lines of all of this, Internet of Things, big data analytics, all of it. And she said, I want to understand how we can be doing things better in commerce, and also what should we be thinking about going forward. And we spent a couple of years really working in this kind of public-private partnership model of how can government do more in this space. One of the most interesting things I found out from her is that as part of this advising, we talked a lot about skills and how people need data skills. And she said, okay, we're going to create this kind of data academy within the Department of Commerce, train people up on all these skills.
Cool.
And one of the things that impressed me the most was she said, I'm going to be one of the first people to take these classes. And she actually
No
sat
kidding.
in and did those classes too. And it was like, that's exactly the kind of leader you need.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. Well, and because I've geeked out on her family's history. Like, for those that don't know the name Pritzker, it's kind of like Hilton, except they started Hyatt and a ton of other hospitality companies. And I know because I've got friends that work in philanthropy that kind of touches up on that. One of their core passions is like workforce enablement or upskilling or training. That's one of the key initiatives that they give to. So I'm like, of course you did. That makes total sense.
That's right.
Okay, one more, and this is still me just kind of geeking out, like getting to know you. When I've heard of ITIF, where you work, I've heard of like pretty substantial pieces of legislation that y'all are more or less like accredited with. So the way that I think about it, but then I really want to hear like, oh my gosh, what is it like inside kind of the engine that's spitting out these core pieces of policy? It's that ITIF proposed the concept of like even regional innovation hubs in the Chips and Science Act, which I know a lot of my VCs talk a lot about and know a lot about. The Office of Clean Energy, even the idea of that existing within the Department of Energy and how they oversee like massive clean energy grants and funding. What else? I put in my notes like some role in some of the AI executive orders. So I say that one
Mhm.
to continue to like kind of place all this credibility on the institution. But another one of like take me behind the scenes. For one, are there any other like core pieces of policy from the last 5 years that people would remember that y'all have contributed to? And then like, what is that actually like?
Yeah. Well, certainly. I mean, we have been very involved and we're the genesis of a lot of these ideas. Open Government Data Act is another big one.
Yeah.
So all the
Yeah.
federal open data that's been out there, that was a
Cool.
bill that we really helped draw up. And I mean, it's fascinating. If you've watched the Schoolhouse Rock, how does a piece of how does a bill become legislation? Those kinds of things. How does a bill become law? going behind the scenes and seeing it, I mean, the truth is it's a lot of people working really hard, and the hardest workers are certainly those people on the Hill who take the time. They meet with everyone. There's quibbles and fights over just the every single piece of text that goes in there. But it's worth it in the end, because you do see some really big ideas that it takes a lot to convince someone, not only is this the right direction, but this is specifically exactly what we should be doing in these areas.
Hmm.
And you have to get all of the supporters, all the people you need to buy into that idea. You can have one person block things in the Senate. So it's a lot of hard work, but I think it pays off. And what I think is most interesting to me, I've been now in this space for almost 20 years, is it is a bipartisan
Hmm.
effort. I mean, as much as we see about partisan fights going on all the time, so many of these big bills, they've all been bipartisan. These big tech bills, right? Um,
Hmm.
Pretty much left or right. People get that the future of this country depends on American leadership and innovation, America's
Hmm.
success in science and technology. And so that's something that, when you start to talk to, legislators or policymakers about those important issues, they get behind it.
Hmm. Cool. Really cool. Well, so part of the reason I asked about, it's like, oh, you guys were a part of the Chips and Science Act. Like, that's so seminal. Once again, for a lot of our listeners in Silicon Valley, it's like, oh, we know a lot about that. Segue time. We're going to dive right into the headline that you wrote a brilliant piece on that I'll set up. And I'm okay if we spend 15, 20 minutes talking about it, because there's so much here. And I think there's layers that the average, maybe like news consumer misses, but it is around Trump announcing that the federal government was securing a 10% equity stake in Intel as a condition for receiving the something close to $9 billion in funding promise that they applied for and went through all the steps, starting with the Chips and Science Act that Biden put out 2 or 3 years ago. In that same spirit, just to make it really clear, this isn't a one off. In the same month, the administration required Nvidia and AMD to pay 15% of their revenue to China in order to obtain like export licenses. And just to some of the quotes, Trump said it himself, I hope I'm going to have a lot more cases like this. And Secretary Lutnick literally said, we should take a stake in all the big defense contractors, and Lockheed, like Lockheed Martin in particular, which he described as an arm of the US government. When I each of those, I just got progressively more mind blown of like, maybe at first glance, I could maybe start to steel man where they're coming from, but I have 20 holes I poke in this. But before I do, I want to hear I want to start with, you were part of the authoring process of the exact Chips and Science Act. And now this is such a strange contortion. From that perspective, how did you take that initial news of saying, no, 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 we're actually going to require 10% ownership?
Right, right. I mean, that's where I think, anyone that was just tuning in said, "Oh, US government's paying out $10 billion to Intel. Sure, why shouldn't it get some kind of stake in it?"
Yeah.
But if you've understood what's been happening here, you understood that, wait a second, let's roll the tape back to where we
Yeah.
started, right? This was a grant program set up specifically to encourage these companies to provide them funding to set up manufacturing here in the United States. That was the entire purpose of this program. It was to tell Intel and AMD and these companies, we're going to give you this money because we know it costs a lot to move manufacturing out of other locations and bring it here to the United States, and we think it's worth it. And if you take that risk of doing that, we're going to provide you some money to help
Yeah.
minimize that risk. That was the deal. There was a deal that was already made, and that was it. And that was what the funding was supposed to be for, right? And now they're saying, well, wait a second, you haven't actually, the check hasn't it hasn't cleared the bank yet. So why don't we start renegotiating things here? And I think that's what was so frustrating to everyone who's watched this, because they said, now, wait a second. First of all, you're rewriting the terms of the agreement. You kind of flash back to like Darth Vader and, Lando Calrissian, if you're a Star Wars fan, saying, I hope I don't, change the terms even further, right? Like, the deal's getting worse by the minute here. So, I mean, I think that was one of the issues. But the bigger issue here is that, this is just, it's a bad policy on so many different angles, as you said. Like, you start poking all these holes in it, right? So, I mean, part of it, you're thinking, wait a second, like, is this really how we're just going to be doing business going forward? Like, is this going to be whenever a company, an American company, needs something from the federal government, that they're going to have to basically pay to play? Like, is this what government is going to become? Because that's terrible. I mean, that's just like, it doesn't matter who's in charge. That is bad governance. That's not what you want to see happen. That's not the way democracy should work. That's not how you get good economic policy, because what is good for the government in the short term might be bad for our economy in the long term. And that's where, it's such a terrible idea from that perspective alone. And so when you see, Secretary Lutnick saying, well, maybe we're going to start doing this more and more, and the president saying, yeah, I'd like to see more of these types of cases, you say, wait a second, no, let's really pump the brakes on that. The second part of this is, okay, what does this mean in terms of like, what does it actually mean for these companies? And that's the part that I think is particularly bad, right? Because one, this is, basically you're taking away capital from these companies. You're taking, if they're giving up shares, if Intel's giving up shares, these are shares that they can't use, they can't capitalize in any other way to raise money in the future. If you're talking about, Nvidia, for example, having to say, we're gonna take the revenue that we're getting from China and now pay 15% of that to the U.S. government. That's revenue that's not going into R&D
Yeah,
for the
correct.
next generation of chips that they need to make. That's the big problem. It's not just what are the short-term costs, but these are big costs when we think about where does the American economy go next? Where do these U.S. companies go next? How can they be competitive and thrive? And we need, we need the government to be working hand in hand with industry, not asking for a handout.
Oh, totally. Well, so I'm gonna keep painting the picture, because I really do. I think this is, of headlines, this is one that I fear is most ripe for misinterpretation. Just
Yeah.
like you framed it, it's like, oh, we got a deal. Yeah, Trump, part of the deal. That's his thing. And it's like, whoa, pump the brakes. there are so many reasons this is a problem, and capitalists, business owners, venture capitalists should be raising the red flag, and no one has, not nearly to the rate that they should be. So let's just keep
Yeah.
pulling back the layers, because I've followed this space so closely, just in the decade that I've been in tech. Just 5 years ago. So let's call it like right around, like before COVID and the market dropping and then skyrocketing. In 5 years, AMD, another top player in this space, their stock has tripled.
Mhm.
That's like, okay, hey, for such a hot sector, chips being the like foundational building block to AI, kind of makes intuitive sense. The thing that's mind-boggling is, like, you and I look around and we're like, you know what stock we all should have bought 5 years ago? Nvidia. If you bought pre-COVID, you're up not 3x, you're up 30x. So everyone's just like, oh my gosh, you buy 100 grand in Nvidia, your life has changed forever. Like, that's crazy. And here's Intel, they're down by 50%. And I think there's all these underlying, unfortunately, like strategic errors for what has been a multi-generational, like industrial leader. They missed the mobile wave in the 2010s. Really no diversification away from PCs. Completely missed the GPU wave that is now undergirding the AI development. And for all those reasons, the stock is down, sales are down, their gross margin is down by 50%. So of all companies, I think I also want to just point a flashlight at, like, so Trump, Mr. Art of the Deal, you're picking on, I hate to say this, Intel. Oh, this is kind of mean. They're kind of the washed up, like, it's like the athlete that's in the last year of their prime. Like I love watching sports, and it's like, now that's the 42-year-old who's trying to throw the ball. Like his knees are out, his hips are out. He was great back in the day, don't get me wrong, but that's who you're putting the big contract on. Like their best days were maybe behind them. And then even worse is my real fear is that the Chips and Science Act, what that ultimately, for folks that don't follow it closely, what it ultimately means is that we want to be able to build the building block to AI in the US and not be dependent on Taiwan in particular, China, elsewhere. What a scary thought that the company we're betting on, we're now damning. An investor that knows Trump with all his whims and proclivities at the drop of a hat can now bully Intel and say, hey, you probably need to fire some folks. You have some departments that aren't profitable, but hey, it looks bad in the political arena. You can't do it. That's really scary. I'll get into this later. Sounds a
Yeah.
lot like China. That ain't American. That's the opposite of free market enterprise. So all of a sudden, what I really fear is that Trump has trained Wall Street in the last 7 months that these decisions are made haphazardly. They're made quickly. They're made at 9 p.m. on his Twitter thumbs when he has an idea. And therefore, do you want to bet on Intel when he is a major shareholder who could allow politics to outstrip necessary business decisions? And therefore, I fear there will be a short-term stock pop and a long-term stock plummet. And once again, this is a company that I want to bet on. Like they could come back. They have so many foundational IP and teams that still are so capable.
Yeah.
I don't want them to be damned.
Right. And I mean, that's the issue for all of these companies that could potentially find themselves in this situation. What happens when they say, I need to make some layoffs?
Yeah.
And it's in a red district and it's a Republican president. Do they not do it? Do they not make, the cuts they need to make? Do they not pivot to a new technology that's where
Totally.
they need to go, but they don't have that option? And, you just can't have the politics and the business that closely linked together. They have to have their separate incentives. Right, and that's the issue there, and, right now, I mean, it's clear that, this is the summer of tariffs, right? The
Yeah.
president's been doing everything he can to raise money, partially to pay for the big beautiful bill, to say, how can we raise new revenue? And so all these deals are about, can we kind of close this fiscal gap? You're not gonna solve, the fiscal deficit through, taking 10% of Intel or 15% of sales to China. That's not gonna fix it, but it
Oh, it's
will
so
hurt
off.
just long term.
Well, so let's do those numbers. Fiscal deficit, call it 2.5 trillion, give or take. And now the big beautiful bill, depending on whose calculations you listen to, what we know is just the tax cuts alone add $4 trillion to the deficit.
Mhm.
So it's like we already have a 2.5 trillion annual problem. Now we're just throwing another 4 trillion of problems. His game or his hope is that he's going to be able to make the case that, oh, it's not $4 trillion out the door. They're just tax cuts for the rich, like the Democrats say, but we're going to claw it back in these different manners. Let's just play out. Okay, $9 billion in equity in Intel.
Mhm.
If I am utterly surprised and the stock goes up in the next 2 years, like I'm talking seriously, seriously surprised, it's up 5%. It's up 10%.
Yeah.
We're talking like hundreds of millions of dollars, which, okay, if I made $100 million, my life is different. But $100 million on a $2.5 trillion annual deficit, that's like you and me. It's like, oh, I make 100 grand a year. And someone said, hey, I'm 50 grand in debt. Here's $20. Good luck. It's like,
Yeah.
bro, you aren't even in the right league. Like we're so far off. So in light of that $2.5 trillion deficit, there's got to be some better strategies we could be enacting other than trying to get some Intel stock here or there. But like, Daniel, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the big challenge here is, of course, how do we actually win in advanced industries, right? This is the big challenge. It's not, whether we have a low tax policy growth strategy, which is basically what the R's are trying to do, or try to basically raise up the middle class, which is what the Democrats are trying to do. It's how do we actually win as a country these long-term, advanced industries that we're basically betting our futures on. In the past, it was things like, we had companies like Boeing, we had companies like Intel, right? These were the advanced technology sectors that the U.S. led in, and that led to our overwhelming economic success. We have to do that again and again and again, and the only way to do that is by investing in science and technology. And so everything else just kind of misses that big picture, and that's the problem with that kind of short-term
Mm.
thinking we see in Washington sometimes.
Hmm, hmm. I agree. It's harkening my mind back to a point that it feels like a theme of this show in the last 3 weeks, which is instead of just debating the nuts and bolts of policy, policy is just a reflection of our value set. Ultimately, if you do a good job peeling back the layers, and the value set that I would argue I'm seeing when Trump tries to negotiate another 10% equity is it's a value around, honestly, taking advantages of businesses that are down and out, trying to cut a quick deal, trying to cut a corner, trying to make a quick buck. I'm obviously, those are all pretty negative things, but that's how I read it. Whereas the value set that I believe has been the foundational pillar of the American economic dream post World War II is the government creating a free and fair legislative regime, tax regime where everyone can compete. It's just free market enterprise. It's like it's so basic. It's so down the middle of the fairway. And if there are core sectors or technologies that are critical to our national security, or honestly, I might just stop there. Critical to our national security, which I would make the case for. AI, critical to national security. Drones, same thing. Like electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, all of these key things that China's kind of lapping us on. Those are those unique cases where the government, I endorse them getting involved if they are value additive and not in this zero sum tariff game, but saying, hey, us onshoring chips, the foundational building block to AI, we need that here for our national security. So we aren't going to play all these games. We're just going to invest. We're going to make it easier and faster for business people to do what they do best, which is build. But that's, for me, that's like, those are the values that I wish were so ubiquitous, so common, so like easily understood that my fellow founders would see the Intel equity stake and be like, that ain't it. That's actually pretty zero sum, and that's not long-term thinking. But maybe like, how else would you describe American values actually like done well in things like trade policy and industrial policy?
Yeah. Well, so I don't want to make it sound like what I've said so far is all anti-Trump, because I've
Yeah. No, that's
really
great. No, that's
focused on this recent
no. Thanks
thing,
for
which
saying that.
as I've said is bad. But let me give you an example of one thing that I think Trump has done really well. The Trump administration has
Yeah,
done really
please
well.
do that.
That's exactly to your point about
Yeah.
the type of values we want to see, I think, coming from government, and that's defending American companies, right?
Hmm.
I think one of the frustrations that I know a lot of people in Silicon Valley have had for a while is that and really probably since the Obama administration, right? The Obama administration, a lot of Silicon Valley, they loved Obama. There was just, it was the tech, tech was happy with him. He was happy with tech.
Totally.
That was the end of this kind of golden era of
Yeah.
government working hand in hand
Yeah.
with the federal government. But then there was all that backlash, right? There was backlash
Totally.
uh, for lots of reasons. I think some people blamed Facebook for why Clinton lost, right? I mean, there's
Sure.
all these
Sure.
things that came up. Brexit, it was the same thing. The UK, they blamed social media. But what I think Trump has done that is so important is he's defended American companies against foreign laws that attack
Hmm.
U.S.
Mm-hmm.
economic interests. And that's something that I think people have been asking for a long time. We've seen a lot
Hmm.
of European laws in particular, Digital Markets Act,
Oh,
Digital Services
totally.
Act,
Yeah.
right? Recently, the UK Online Safety Act,
Hmm.
laws around internet content, online platforms. They're all say they're, fundamentally about, treating all companies the same, that they're not anti-American. If you ask the European policymakers, they'll say these are not anti-American laws. We did some research earlier this summer looking at GDPR, the data protection law in Europe. Overwhelmingly, overwhelmingly across the board, most of the fines hit American companies, not European companies. There's so many things that Europe does right now that really hurts American businesses, right? So let's talk about them. GDPR, the General Data Protection
Yeah.
Regulation. This is the European law that regulates data protection, data privacy, and it is extraterritorial. So it impacts all these American businesses, even if they are not operating in Europe. If they have any data basically about a European, they have to follow GDPR. Turns out, disproportionately, American firms have gotten fines for violating GDPR compared to European firms. And that doesn't even make sense, right? There are more European firms out there, just hair salons and dentists, right, in Europe that have European data. They're just as likely to make mistakes. It's not like there's been more data breaches in the United States than Europe. But overwhelmingly, American companies have faced more fines. DMA, the Digital Markets Act. This is basically the law that sets, the rules for antitrust in Europe. These have targeted American firms overwhelmingly, right? These are the laws that are telling Apple, this is how you have to design, the iPhone, or this is what you have to put in for the Apple Store. Those are not the types of rules that Europe should be setting for the whole world. It certainly shouldn't be setting the rules for what American companies can do. Now, obviously, they can set rules within Europe, but so much of this is extraterritorial. So much of this is focused on, they say it's just on large businesses, but they're always large American businesses, right? I mean, that's the problem here. And they're hurting American companies, they're hurting American innovation. And here's the part that I should really want to emphasize. This is the part that matters. I don't think most people quite get when we start talking about antitrust. Most of the people, I think historically, they've said, well, what does it matter if you break up an American tech company, or what does it matter if they're hurt? You're just going to have another American tech company step in. But
Hmm.
that's not where we are today. What happens today is if you hurt the American tech company, you're going to have a Chinese company step
Correct.
in and take over. It's not going to be a European company. So I don't even know why Europe is doing this. It's going to be a Chinese company. And that's where we have to defend our interests. And that's where I think it's fantastic that we have an administration that's pushing back. And what's crazy to me is now the Europeans, they're acting like the victims here. They're saying, what is this
Um,
administration doing standing up for American companies? We should stand up to them for standing up to us. And, they start acting like the victim here. And, I think it's great that this administration, I think more members of Congress need to be pushing back and say, no, if you set rules and you disproportionately go after American companies, or create rules that hurt American companies, we're going to use any leverage we can to resist those rules. That is a
hmm.
fair and appropriate thing for for a country to do.
Hmm. Hmm. Well said, Daniel. Heard, agreed. Um, I think it's so like one of these like proofs in the pudding. How many big tech companies come out of Europe or stay in Europe? I just have so many first person accounts of an amazing French founder, a German founder. And what do? They moved to New York.
Yeah,
And even on the flip side, I've been following. I'm got connected to one of the founders at Klarna, which is one of these like top fintech players across Europe and then global. Each of the top European players. Same with the Brits. They're disproportionately once they get to that late stage. They've been around for a decade. It's time to IPO. They're IPOing in the U.S. So there's all these really compelling trends to say the EU point that I think, I don't know how to say her name perfectly, but it's like Ursula von der Leyen, whatever the
yep,
EU
yep,
chairwoman is. Her saying the line that I remember a couple months back, which is the US will export tech and we'll export regulation.
right.
That line just I was like, What? You said that with a straight face? Like, who thinks those thoughts? That's crazy. It just was it killed me inside. Because what is actually happening? The US is exporting tech. The EU is exporting regulation, trying to. And as well, the EU is exporting their best minds and their best founders.
Yeah.
And they're setting up shop in the US. And for me, that's one of these paces that I go to quick, which is for 30 years now, most of my adult life, the world grew used to our unique unipolar moment, which is just a funny way for saying like, hey, the US was kind of winning and we didn't have any real competition. USSR dissolved, and for a handful of reasons, China was trying to play catch up, but we aren't in that moment anymore. And therefore, where I do give Trump and anyone that would espouse this saying like, we need the US business sector to win, and we need to make it the best place to compete. And we want to invite the best people to come here and win for us under our flag.
Yeah.
All of those points, whoever says it, I am so on board. And that flows into immigration policy, that flows into funding, that flows everywhere. But for me, it's just such a stark example when you compare it to the EU. And I quite literally spent a couple weeks traveling there last year. It's like, yeah, all the top founders I knew, they're like, oh, Quinn, I tried splitting time in New York, and even that was too hard. I just live in New York now. Like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, that's telling.
And I mean, that just it's so frustrating to the Europeans, but they have this new proposal out called Eurostack. You've heard of this. It's this idea that they're going to replicate every layer of the tech stack, the American tech stack in Europe. And what's crazy is that they're not saying we're going to innovate. They're not saying we're going to take every layer of the tech stack and do it better and we're going to win the market because of that. They're saying, no, we're just going to do the exact same thing those guys are doing. And we just want all the Europeans to buy from us instead of buying from the Americans. And, and the only way that would work is, of course, if they have policies that they enact that are protectionist, that they really kind of close the door to outside competition. And they look at, Boeing versus Airbus and say, oh, wasn't this a great success? And they'll say, through all their protectionist policies, which they've WTO and others have said, no, what you did was wrong, but they'll just try and do it again. But they'll say, isn't this great? We came up with, now we have Airbus, now we have Boeing. It's fair and equal. And our point is no. I mean, first of all, we're not seeing a ton of innovation in aerospace from these two companies right now.
Totally.
In terms of in terms of you're not getting on the next aircraft and say, wow, this is next generation, and so the question is so tech is completely different. Tech has these innovation life cycles of 4 months, 6 months, right? You want to move quickly. And that's not what Europe's doing. That's not what they're doing with the regulatory policy. And that's what we want to see in the US is an environment that, as you said, I mean, it's the regulatory environment, it's the it's the people, it's the workforce that we have the talent here, it's the tax policy, it's the funding from venture capital, it's the connections with industry and academia. All that has to come together. It's the IP laws, right? Like all comes together. And it's not just saying, yeah, we'll just do what they've done and we'll call that innovation and be done with it.
Oh my gosh. Well, no, it sounds like China 20 years ago. Like that's just the idea of like, yeah, I've spent a little bit of time in China, and you think of our big tech player, Google, they kind of got their knockoff, Baidu. You think of Amazon, they got their knockoff, Alibaba. Like you can just go down the list one by one, and that just to try to implement that strategy in 2025 feels a little laughable. But let's keep going. I'm looking at the time, and there's so much I want to cover. The next one that is right in this kind of the spirit of this conversation is the history that now culminated in Trump allowing companies like Nvidia and AMD to export to China again. And I'll set it up, but then I really want to kind of hear your experience of it over the last couple of years. My understanding is that it started as like a legislative discussion 3 years ago under the Biden administration. And it's been this on again, off again kind of policy set. And to the point that when Trump came into office, and you tell me if I'm getting any of this wrong, the diffusion law was already live, but then he ratcheted it up in April, and then just last month actually removed it and said, Nvidia and AMD, you can export chips to China if they follow a specific set of specs, and that those specs ultimately throttle all of the core compute by like 50%, give or take, depending on it. It's all a little complicated. It's around like high bandwidth memory and how does that really, like, anyway, there's lots of ways to slice and dice it, but really 30 to 50%, meaning like, think of selling a Ferrari, but setting the speed limit at 40 miles an hour. It's like, is it a Ferrari still? Is it like, well, I don't know. You tell me. Maybe it looks nice. Maybe you paid a high price. But then I liked how your recent piece on it spotlighted a couple of really good points, but I'm going to start with this Elizabeth Warren quote that I thought you did such a good job framing, which is, she said, "It is shameful that even as American companies wait months, if not years, to acquire these chips, Nvidia and the Trump administration are prioritizing sending these chips to the PRC." And at the same time, there was a different Congress, I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right, Raja Krishnamurthy in Illinois, claimed that Nvidia was circumventing the U.S. rules in Nvidia selling what's expected to be like $15 billion in chip revenue over the remainder of this year, like a huge, huge sum. When in reality, because I followed this so closely, Jensen Huang, founder and CEO at Nvidia, has been playing this game of cat and mouse, just trying to get approved. Saying like, hey, you tell me the rules, I'm going to play by the rules. Oh, you told me I have to set the Ferrari speed limit at 40 miles an hour? Great, we'll figure it out. So if anything, it's been the exact opposite of what Elizabeth and this other representative said. He's been just trying to stay within the lines on all these different iterations.
Yeah.
And it's not like what Senator Warren said, that like everyone's in line for H20s, which is like that weird slow Ferrari.
Right.
They're in line for the Ferrari, which they're buying. And that's a whole different conversation entirely. And NVIDIA is hustling to meet that demand. But to conflate those two things, from when it either signals that she doesn't quite understand what's going on, or that she's so dogmatic that she won't even like make the case for how Jensen is a national treasure that we should be so thankful for, who is building a generational company that is core to the U.S.'s supremacy and national security, which for me is like, oh, that's just where the conversation starts and ends. But maybe paint some additional context of you following that narrative for the last 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's been fascinating to watch because it started with this idea that everyone pretty much agreed on, which is we shouldn't sell our most advanced chips to to the Chinese military. Okay, nobody wanted to do that. From U.S. companies, U.S. companies weren't going to be doing that. We don't sell our most advanced technology to the Chinese military in general. So fine. We have restrictions in place for that type of thing to begin with. So sure, put advanced chips on there, right? But then they started saying, well, wait a second, maybe the Chinese military, they're going to be smart. They're not going to buy it and say, I'm the Chinese military. They're going to, have a Chinese company buy it or they're going to pay a Chinese company to do something and get it from them. So they said, why don't we expand, these rules a little bit more? And then they said, well, wait a second, then we should maybe expand a little bit more and a little bit more. And that's kind of how this spiraled. And basically they kept realizing that, wait a second, there's holes in this plan. There's holes in this plan to keep chips out, to guarantee that no chip could get to the Chinese military. And that's true. I mean, if it's a product, it can be moved around. If you sell it, you don't have control over what that third party does. So there's a chance that some chips, move around the black market. But I mean, there's a few things going on here. First of all, the Chinese military is probably not trying to use U.S. chips that much, just like the U.S. military isn't trying to use Chinese chips, right? There's national security interests that go both ways, and they just don't want that. Second of all, you know, the bigger issue here is what are we doing for U.S. companies? Like, are we compare how the Chinese innovation ecosystem works versus the American one? The Chinese innovation ecosystem, which is actually doing really well right now in AI, it comes from government funding, right? It's government pouring tons of money into this area and saying, we want to lead in AI, and so we're going to pour lots of money into it, and we're going to have companies and academic research and these kind of quasi-governmental organizations doing research, and that's where the success will come from. And in America, we do it through the free market and a capitalist system. Um, the problem is if you start telling the capitalist system it can no longer make money by selling your products abroad, that ruins the innovation ecosystem. And so, which kind of world do we want to live in? One where we're absolutely sure that no American chip ever kind of reaches the Chinese market, or one where we have, the Chinese economy funding American innovation
I mean,
by buying
totally.
our chips and providing the funds that go into that R&D for the next generation. And so, that's what we generally want to see. And so, there has to be some balance here. And that's where I think, the last set of Biden rules, that the fusion rule, which is the one that came out right before the Trump administration came in, that it was so onerous. It was setting up a
Yeah.
licensing regime. So basically, the majority of the world, I mean, even traditional U.S. allies like India, Brazil, you would have to have a license to export to these countries, and there would be caps on how many chips you could send to these countries. These countries were furious, first of all. I mean, they're like, why should you as America tell us what we can and can't buy? And if you are going to tell us what we can and can't buy, then we're probably going to go buy from someone else, which is horrible from, a US market perspective. I mean, this is going back to like, when the Snowden revelations came out,
Yeah.
in the early 2000s, and people were saying, well, wait a second, maybe we shouldn't buy American cloud services because of the national security implications. This was a complete cell phone that never should have happened. And so it was a fantastic thing when I think the administration finally kind of rolled these back and said, wait a second, no, if you follow the rules, you can export, you can get a license. And so when we start to see, the critiques come out and say, oh, these companies are circumventing the rules. Well, they were following the rules. So circumventing the rules would be, somehow cheating and not following the rules and trying to evade the rules. They're getting a license. They're saying, if you say this is how much, high density memory I can have on my chip, then that's how much high density memory I'm gonna have on my chip. If you're saying this is how fast it can be, this is how fast it's going to be. And so, they're doing the right thing. And your kind of comparison about the Ferrari, the slow Ferrari, that's exactly what's going on here. I mean, the whole point of the value proposition that's being put out here, and the reason this works is because U.S. companies are saying, look, you can't get our best chip, but we can give you a pretty good chip.
Okay.
And it's better to buy that pretty good chip from us than try and get a black market chip, because
Yeah.
the black market chip is not going to have any support. It could be fraudulent. It could, I mean, these chips break. I mean, there's all sorts of issues that go on. Or you can buy from us and you get something legitimate. You also have to remember that, the alternative here is Huawei and Huawei chips,
That's what I was about to bring up.
right?
Yeah.
And, first of all, we want American companies, we want Nvidia to be successful over Huawei.
Yeah.
As an American, I can freely say that. I think, Europeans and US allies should be able to say that too. But the other thing that's also true that I think people forget is, Huawei has competitors in China too. So it's not like
Yeah.
all these Chinese
Right.
companies are dead set on buying Huawei chips. They prefer to buy Nvidia half the time because, Nvidia is not necessarily their competitor in some of these other markets where Huawei is. So there's also some actually really interesting dynamics there that, just let the market work, and it's actually going to work out pretty well for U.S. companies.
Oh, totally. Everything you said. Oh, you hit all the most important talking points. The only other one that comes to mind for me is let's not underestimate the size of international demand for chips in the next decade.
Mhm.
Especially, I've spent a lot of time in the Arab Gulf. They've got a seemingly limitless appetite for AI chips, GPUs. Europe will get there. Like, there's India will be an important player. Like, there's so many of these different regions. And in the same way that I often get a little frustrated with friends when they're like, "Oh, I hate big tech. It messes us all up. It's messing with our brain." Like, whatever. I'm like, "Hey, just a reminder, close to 50% of big tech's revenue is international. It is one of our most important national resources and revenue generators, and therefore tax generators, either through like the obvious corporate tax and then all the individual income created. 50% of that is us winning on the global arena, not just the national arena.
Right.
And if you start with that understanding, which most of my friends skip that step, you would then understand how important it is that we don't cede AI chip dominance to our biggest competitor
Right.
in such a pivotal moment. Why in the world would I want to all of a sudden pull up the drawbridge on these slow Ferraris and therefore force China's hand to invest even more? Like for them, it's all these big federal subsidies. It's just all this free government money that comes sloshing around the system. There's all this corruption and bloat, but whatever, it makes its way to the engineers and good stuff happens. They create good work. Huawei and the 3 to 4 other major chip creators, if we cut them off, it will become a national priority for them to create the state-of-the-art chip as soon as possible. And all of a sudden, in the same way they undercut us on every other global market, they're going to start out trying to undercut us in Saudi, a huge net buyer, in Europe, in India, and all these places. I'm like, in what world do we want to just, like, I'm sure there's so many metaphors, but it's like, in what world do you look at, oh, we're about to have the National Basketball Championship, and I want to, like, give the other team this huge rallying cry of why they should beat us. I'm like,
Right.
oh, let's just focus on winning. Let's not get in their head. So anyway, it seems like another unnecessary own goal or like self-sabotage.
Yeah.
Maybe I've got one or two other places I want to go. I'm looking at the time. But I think I want to end with this almost philosophical question that seems to be another one of these themes that winds around from one episode to the next, which is some people in my network have a binary belief that we either need to choose a ton of AI regulation and slow us down, or we need to focus on intelligent, safe, rapid acceleration. And it's like, maybe folks are steel manning the two sides more than they need to. But beside the point, I'm on the like, hey, it's time to actually get on the AI acceleration train. And there are going to be so many positive externalities that trickle down throughout society quickly.
Mhm.
But Daniel, like, maybe it's a tough question, but where do you land
Yeah.
in that binary presupposition?
I mean, I'm 100% on the accelerate adoption side.
Okay.
I mean, this is, you know, I think it's so easy to imagine how things go wrong. It's hard to imagine how things go right. And it's hard to remember how hard it is to actually get to make change in the world.
Mm.
And to me, again, I've been working in the kind of tech policy space for a while. One of the analogies I see to this moment is electronic health records. So
Oh.
electronic health records, right? Technology itself has been around since the 80s, right? We're just talking about digital files of people's health information. There's no, and networking. I mean, this is all things we know how to do. Put computers in doctors' offices. Actually getting that change in place so that you could prescribe drugs electronically and get it to the pharmacy and see how it interacts with people's known health conditions to reduce adverse medical events, right? Actually making that happen, $40 billion worth of federal investment, all of these incentives, lots of education of healthcare providers, lots of education of just patients. I mean, and even today, I think my dog has a better electronic medical record than I do because, the vets could just adopt it. It was easy for them, but to get, complicated healthcare systems to do it with the different payers and providers, that was so much harder. And I think that's the problem we have with AI is that actually getting big, meaningful change where AI drives down the cost of healthcare for the average person, where it actually, increases lifespans, where it, just, reduces, infant mortality, all of these
Mm.
big things that we could do right? Actually getting that change is going to be so hard if we don't have government working hand in hand with the private sector, because change is hard. It's not the technology isn't going to be there, it's that the actual change itself is hard. These are socio-technical systems. It's not just about the tech, it's not just about the people, it's about getting them to work together. And so we see that issue, I think, just crop up again and again. Education, similar issue. Getting
Mm,
AI into schools. Our parents go nuts about privacy. I'm a parent. I care about privacy, but I also care about my kids learning. I want them to learn better, and I want them to have a personalized education. I want them to have access to the best
mm,
tutors in the world, which is going to depend on having AI in the classroom, right? You think about transportation, self-driving vehicles, like all of these areas, and even just government. Can we have AI in government to, actually get a Doge kind of idea, this idea of efficiency in government that actually leads to better government, more efficient government, not just, across the board cuts, but actually more efficiency and better outcomes. That's
mm,
all really, really hard to do. And so I want to see acceleration. I want to see, these big ideas, this kind of moonshot ideas.
mm.
We have to push forward.
Wow. Daniel, some of our early listeners are going to think that I like paid you to say all that because that is one of my like favorite little pet projects. Here's some of the numbers that I don't have written and I haven't thought of them in 3 months, but it's things like a quarter of our national healthcare expenses are on administration. It's a quarter to a third,
Yeah.
which all of a sudden you add all that up, that's like a $1.5 to $2 trillion space. It's massive, 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 massive. And then you back into what is the US government's primary costs. I'm a huge proponent for government efficiency. And I would just argue, well, in order to be efficient, you probably got to tackle the really, really big expenses. And
Mhm.
healthcare is the number one. It's like
Yep.
if all the way through Medicare, Medicaid, and then the VA, I would have to do the math, but we're looking at, my guess is 30 to 35% of the cumulative budget. So all of a sudden, if you can, with AI, streamline that quarter of expenses, which also equates to like, it's sometimes a half of a practicing doctor or surgeon's time is spent on administration.
Mhm.
So you're both cutting this huge cost center and bloat, and dare I say, doubling the productivity of the actual front end practitioners. I'm like, every economist should be like jumping over the moon. Like, this would be massive. This would have such huge ramifications. And I think how I would though, it's always important to ground it in like, okay, well, what is my neighbor across the street? What are they going to hear when it's like AI and healthcare? Oh my gosh, like, can I talk to my doctor? Like, yes, yes, yes. You're actually going to have more access to your doctor.
Right.
And if your doctor's busy or it's 1 a.m., talk to the AI and maybe they can actually get you some really basic low level prescriptions and give you some coaching. And most importantly, think of how much you spend on insurance every month. If you're a family of five, that's a big part of your budget. And what if, in just a couple years, the government partnered with some really smart technologists, just just targeted AI at the administrative sector, and your and my healthcare costs drop by 30%.
Yeah.
That's that'll gets me hyped. That'll get
Right.
me really, really stoked. And that's just the healthcare administrative sector. You touched on education. There's transportation. There's like so many of these spaces that I think both cutting massive cost centers and unleashing labor productivity at
Mhm.
the highest level. Those are godsends at a time when we're drowning in our fiscal deficit, when we have so many other societal kind of plights. I'm like, those are the two things I'm most excited about. But
Right.
anyway,
Yeah.
do you agree or
And
disagree?
and we should be excited about it. I mean, that's the thing when we talk about AI,
Yeah,
we should be I mean, this is an incredible technology, right? I mean, it's gonna change so many
totally.
things, but we should be demanding that this change happen faster
Yeah.
because, I mean, these are, you know, people's lives that are,
Oh,
it's
totally.
not just the cost. I mean, there will be people who die if we don't
Yeah,
accelerate
oh
the
my
adoption
god,
of AI in healthcare. And
totally.
it's this hidden cost that people don't see, and that's why we need to say, okay, no, yes, we want it safe. Of course, we want it safe. Of course, we want it,
Oh yeah, no
oversight. We
brainer.
want all these things. Nobody's disagreeing with that, but that doesn't mean we don't also want it faster and sooner. And and let's do
Totally.
what we need to do to get there. And we want to
Oh,
be American-made technology. I mean, that's something
yeah.
we want.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It is one of these like, of course. It needs to be safe. That's a no-brainer. It's healthcare. We're gonna get this right. Like we're gonna be really intelligent. But man, let's just keep picking pain points. I'm like, I had a friend that was sick. How long did it take him to get approval to meet with the next doctor that is primary? And then something got lost. And it's like the guy was languishing for a month because something in the approval process, like somehow got held up. I'm like, each of those points, that should happen immediately.
Yeah.
Like any business with that kind of a problem would solve it yesterday. So I think if you just keep pinpointing things that we've unfortunately had to, whatever, take for granted or consider normal, I'm like, no, let's just keep popping those bubbles. Same
Yeah.
thing. I'm like, yeah, man, my kid, when she grows up through the school system, I hope her learning experience looks radically different than mine,
Hmm.
all for the sake of learning outcomes and
Right.
her being able to, at a faster and more efficacious clip, learn the desired outcomes. But ultimately, what do I care about? Her finding her passion, her dream job, her dream university. I'm like, hey, I can do all of that. Let's just stop playing this doom and gloom, like
Yeah.
worst case scenario at every corner. Oh, I'm with you, Daniel. Yeah, maybe let's. I'm going to squeeze in one more because you painted such a good picture on the healthcare side. Is there any other like kind of pet topic from AI accelerationism that you're passionate about? Is it transportation? Is it like fill in the blank? Is it
Yeah.
the IRS? Like I'm sure there's plenty that you think about.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, and I'll stick with education for a little bit
Yeah.
longer.
Okay. Please.
Education to me is the one that, I mean,
Yeah.
just it's the one that matters the most, right? It's the one that
Yeah.
every, we cannot have a successful nation without an educated population. And it's not just, can
Mm,
we read and do math? Are we critical thinkers?
yeah.
Do we know how to use technology? But I think the reason school fails for so many children is because it isn't personalized education, right? You're in
Correct.
a
Correct.
classroom, if you're lucky, maybe 20 people. It's probably going to be more than that in most districts
Yeah.
around the nation.
Yeah.
And so we teach to the middle. That's the only thing teachers can do. I mean, they do their best, but they teach to the middle. They teach to the average student. And some students learn faster, some students learn slower. Some learn a certain way, others learn a different way. And with AI, you can create those opportunities. So if you're great at math and you're, a little slower on the science, okay, great. You can have, the AI tutor that goes at your pace and explains the concept. So you don't
Mhm.
get left behind in the science. Maybe you discover that you actually really love it. And, we have these great scientists that might have kind of fallen off of that track because, they weren't being taught the right way for them. Or, you have people that, just, they're going to be fantastic, other types of creators, musicians, right? And
Mm.
they just need to understand how can they be successful in this? What are the business side of music? And
Hmm.
that they wouldn't have gotten there if they don't have a good education. So I see this as the big
Yeah.
opportunity to just across the board, every child in America can have a great education.
Mm.
And without us, having to increase our costs and also putting teachers back in the job they want to do, which is
Yeah.
actually working one-on-one with students, not doing all this administrative work or, you see all the things that they end up spending.
Mm.
That isn't teaching. And to me, AI is the solution to a lot of this. And again, we have to be demanding this change happen quickly because
Mm.
otherwise it won't. There's too many reasons to say, no, let's wait. There's risk. Can
Mm.
we put what will it do to children's minds? What about the privacy? What about the security issues here? How will there's
Mm.
so many unknowns. There's, the FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, doubt. That
Yeah.
kills so many technology projects. And who kind of wins from this? Well, the winner is the children, right? And
Yeah.
and
Oh.
that's what matters. But it doesn't, nobody else really wins from this. And so we have to have leaders who step up and make this change. And that to me is the
Well,
one that I'm most excited about because I think it can happen soon.
brilliant. Ah, Daniel, it's just music to my ears. As a AI educator, I couldn't hit home more. Um, okay, we're at the hour mark. This has been such a good conversation. I've loved every point you've made. Maybe like just give us a last plug for like the work that you're doing within ITF and then the specific data team, how folks can follow you and how they can support.
Absolutely. So all of the work we do, we're a nonprofit organization. It's
Yeah.
available on our website, itif.org, or for our Center for Data Innovation, datainnovation.org. We're always looking to highlight really innovative projects around
Hmm.
data, whether it's a startup or an academic
Hmm.
project. So also, if you're doing something cool with data, reach out to me.
Yeah.
Love to talk to people. It's important that policymakers also know about what's going on in the world of data and tech, because that's the only way they understand that this is something worth fighting for.
Cool. Brilliant. Thanks, Daniel. All right, folks, another amazing episode. I really enjoyed every part of this combo. So, big thank you to Daniel. And make sure you give him a like and a follow on all socials. If your kind of heart is drawn towards the work he's doing, check out ITIF. And otherwise, another episode down, and see y'all next week.